So welcome I should welcome everybody to a new Sunday RTF lecture. So we have our special guest here, Drago Bosnic, who is a geopolitical analyst, author at InfoBRICS, and host at Lux Media. He can fill in the rest of the details. So
Thank you.
without further ado, why don't you take it away, Drago, and you do as you please, and yeah, we'll have a fun chat.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. It's an honor to be here. As you said, my name is Drago Bosnic. I'm a geopolitical and military analyst. I work for the BRICS information portal, but I'm also a research associate at the Global Research or Center for Research on Globalization, headed by Professor Michel Czasudowski. So, of course, well, I mean, the topic would be geopolitics in general, the current situation and everything else that's going on in the world. So, well, as people can imagine, there's a lot going on. We have the crisis, well, pretty much a global crisis on virtually every scale. The world is definitely less safe than it was just several years ago. And of course, it's the result of this clash between the old and the new being the multipolar world order, and the old being the unipolar one that is led by these neoconservatives who are really dead set on keeping the world as it is today. So, or at least, or even making it worse in many ways, as we're able to see, in the destabilization, the general destabilization of the world as we know it. So. In essence, the first thing I would like to address, of course, is well, we could talk about the general crisis in the United States. We see that now the political spectrum is a total mess. We see that the violence has actually erupted between the political, well, the opposing political views, and of course, it's getting out of hand because obviously, when people start shooting each other instead of debating, that's when the trouble actually becomes even bigger. So this is something that cannot be ignored on a global scale because the U.S. is still probably, well, not probably, it is the leading superpower. Any sort of issues, internal issues in the United States will always transplant into global issues because that's just the way the things work, especially because we are still in the dollar system, where the dollar, of course, is the dominant currency. So that just can't be good, obviously, for much of the world, especially the Western Hemisphere. We see something. We see that the war party in Washington, D.C. is as strong as it was before, unfortunately. The Trump administration has made some very important changes. However, there needs to be a lot more done to prevent the war party from pushing everyone into this sort of destabilization. And we see that in Venezuela, particularly in Venezuela, where we have the war party claiming that the president Nicolas Maduro is supposedly a drug kingpin or narco cartel leader, if you want. The idea that he leads a cartel is a bit ridiculous, well, a bit more. But I'm going to give just a few points here for people who don't really understand that part of the world. First of all, the CIA was always involved in creating cartels and creating the situation where the cartels dominate, unfortunately. And this is something that we simply cannot ignore. And this is done simply because it's in the interest of the CIA to be able to make money in ways that are independent from the U.S. government, although they already have the black budget, but still. And also, it leads, it pretty much reinforces the so-called Monroe Doctrine, where the U.S. remains the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere, while the rest of the countries in the Americas are, technically speaking, failed states, because their institutions cannot really sustain themselves in a chaotic environment where you have a bunch of criminals running these countries. So, in essence, we know that the CIA and the deep state, whatever you want to call it, is behind these narco cartels. And the idea that Venezuela is somehow at fault is completely ridiculous. Also, another thing, if you really want to fight cartels, you don't need F-35 fighter jets. You don't need warships armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles. You don't need submarines. You don't need Marines. What you really need are very well organized police forces. And of course, the issue is the lines between security forces in Latin America and cartels are very blurred. Oftentimes, the security personnel are also members of the cartels. And of course, this makes fighting the cartels pretty much impossible. The other problem is if they're part of the political system, you can't really get rid of them. And this is where these countries will remain failed states for as long as the situation remains as such. Unfortunately, we see the war party is going to use that to lay blame on those countries for the drug epidemic that we have in the United States. Now, again, I want to remind people there was an American journalist who was assassinated in 2004. His name was Gary Webb, and he actually made some incredible discoveries regarding the involvement of the CIA and the American so-called national security community between them, and of course, how the CIA and these other three-letter agencies were conducting pretty much the drug trade within the United States. So we know that it's impossible for anyone to conduct this without the knowledge of these three-letter agencies. And because this is facilitated by them, they consider this sort of like a way to control certain parts of the country, especially the inner cities. So again, blaming Venezuela or even China or anyone else for that is completely ridiculous. Yet this is what we have now. We have someone or very powerful groups within the country who are trying to push this war, another war on the American people, and of course the other peoples of other countries that are affected, namely in this case Venezuela. So fighting in Venezuela is going to be a total mess. First of all, Venezuela is a pretty mountainous country, but also it has very large areas under jungles. So essentially, fighting a war against Venezuela would be easier in terms of logistics because the country is much closer to the United States. However, fighting on the ground would be a total disaster because it's a combination of Afghanistan and Vietnam. If you can imagine how disastrous that would be for any military force, including the US military. So again, we see that there's a limited force that is now being gathered not too far from Venezuela's coasts. So we can assume that Trump is not going to attack Venezuela in terms of invasions, but he might launch some limited strikes. We still don't know to what extent the war party is influencing Trump or controlling him or trying to control him. He might be under a lot of pressure to start wars simply because the system is such that you can't really change it overnight or ever, for that matter, because it's been in place, well, at least since the early 20th century. So the issue in this case is the war party might not be happy with limited strikes. They will push for a war elsewhere, and this is where we get to Ukraine. So the problem with the deep state, it is largely migrated to the European Union. And it's now pushing for war in Europe. The United States itself was supportive of this process before Trump took over. And now Trump is trying to get the US out of it. Not because, obviously, not because he's a philanthropist or anything like that. He just understands the geopolitical realities of the Ukrainian conflict. Now, the Ukrainian conflict is important in this case because it demonstrated that all the things we heard about the Russian military, about how it's supposedly weak and unable to fight, that all turned out to be total nonsense because the data that you can see in relevant military sources suggests that the Russian military is actually now the deadliest fighting force on the planet. And the numbers don't lie. At this point, there are nearly 1.8 million dead Ukrainian soldiers, and we have no evidence to prove there is more than 130,000 Russians killed in action. So that would put the ratio of those killed somewhere between 10 and 13 to 1. So that's a disaster. That's a total disaster for any fighting force. And I just want to remind people that the Ukrainian military now is probably one of the deadliest fighting forces on the planet because it has been fighting the Russian military for over 3 years. There are American and Western European NATO commanders who are now saying that there's no military in Western countries that could match the Ukrainian military, even, let alone the Russian military in terms of weapons capabilities, in terms of battle readiness, in terms of battle experience. So now we see a situation where Europe is being pushed into some kind of a confrontation with a country that has 3.5 years of experience in fighting the highest intensity conflict in recent memory, after World War II, at least. And of course, the other issue, of course, is the nuclear escalation. So we shouldn't forget that Russia has nearly 6,000 thermonuclear weapons. And fighting a country like that, even if their military was really doing bad, as the mainstream media suggests, even if their military was doing bad, you would still have to contend with their nuclear arsenal. And you just can't do that. So just want to remind people, on August 6 and August 9, on those 2 days in 1945, the U.S. dropped just two nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing it depends on the source, but some people say it wiped out nearly 300,000 people. Some say 150,000. Whichever of those two figures you accept, it's horrifying. And those two bombs were about 21 and 15 kilotons in destructive power, in yield, respectively. So essentially they would be on a level of a very, very light tactical nuke nowadays, nukes that you can put even in howitzers and other regular artillery. So when it comes to actual strategic nuclear weapons, these weapons have hundreds of times more destructive power than both Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. So again, if anybody wants to fight Russia with such odds, well, I mean, good luck with that, because I mean, we should all be happy that doesn't happen. But good luck to anyone who really wants to do that, because they're going to need it. You see, Russia has been facing various invasions from all sides for well over 1,000 years, for as long as it has existed, and virtually every single time they were attacked. Of course, they were damaged. A lot of people got killed in Russia, but in the end, the empirical experience suggests that the Russian military would always end up in the capital city of the attacker, marching through the streets and, of course, conquering that country, or simply defeating it militarily. So they've been doing that for over 1,000 years, and all that was done before they had 6,000 nuclear weapons. And now there are people in Western Europe who think it's a good idea to go and attack Russia now that they have all that destructive power. So just to give people some perspective, the Russians have a new missile called the RS-28 Sarmat. This missile actually carries the destructive power of 750 Hiroshima bombs. That's a single missile. They have about 50 of those, and those are not the only missiles. Obviously, they have dozens of other types of missiles that could be used there, that also could have nuclear warheads. So again, I think it's important that Trump understands that fighting Russia, or let's say anyone else fighting Russia or America or China in this case, it's not just stupid, it's suicidal. And we as humans, we need to make sure that these countries that have such a destructive potential never fight each other directly. They will always have differing views of how the world should work. They will always have differing interests, economic, national security, or whatever you want to call it. But it's important that they talk. And this is why the recent summit between Trump and Putin on Alaska was such an important thing. And this is where we see that certain political options in all of these countries really are led by people who don't understand geopolitics, or are simply insane, because criticizing, the meeting between two most powerful militaries in the world is something that we should all support as human beings who really want to live on this planet and not see it blown to smithereens. So the issue is the people who run NATO and who run the European Union, they are pushing for escalation. And we see now that Germany wants to increase its military by 100,000 soldiers. Now, again, the last time Germany tried to prepare for war for Russia, with Russia, well, we saw how that ended. And various German entities or polities, if you want, have been trying to conquer Russia since the 12th century. Let's say early 13th century. So that's almost 800 years of attempts to conquer Russia or some of the Russian states that existed at the time. Every single time this failed. Again, this was all before Russia had the largest and the most powerful thermonuclear arsenal on the planet. So in essence, what we really need is for reason to prevail and for leaders to talk with each other regardless of what they think of each other. Not to name names and not to call someone a dictator or whatever, just because you don't like their political system. It's obvious that different political systems are going to be present in various countries because of the societal or civilizational or historical reasons. It's not possible to apply the so-called Western democracy, whatever that is, to other countries because those countries have different ways of functioning. They have a completely different development. For instance, China has always had this very, very different societal development from the West. And to expect that China is going to completely Westernize or change its society just to appease whoever in the war party or in the deep state is absolutely ridiculous. China, for instance, China is not just a country. China is an entire civilization that has existed far, far longer than any country in the West. And when I say far longer, I mean several times longer. There's evidence that the Chinese civilization goes up to 6,000 years old. We have undeniable evidence that goes up to 3,000 years old. So in essence, it's much longer. It has existed for longer than even the Roman Empire, which hasn't really existed for over 15 centuries or over 5 centuries, depending who you ask. So in essence, what we see is we see a massive change in the world. We see that the world is now becoming different, that the world is rejecting the so-called rules-based world order, where only the Western powers determine what happens, or only the Western powers get a say in what other countries can or can't do. And of course, they get the chance to attack other countries with impunity. And of course, this is something that other countries or other regional and global powers have rejected. And this is why we have organizations such as BRICS and organizations such as the SCO, which is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is like sort of this Eurasian branch of BRICS, where only countries from the former Soviet Union, China, and the Middle East and South Asia are member states. Belarus was recently admitted, if I'm not mistaken. So in essence, we see that there's a fragmentation of the planet into different blocks. And at this time, we could say there are two blocks. We have the unipolar bloc led by the United States, and we have the multipolar bloc, where there are several very, very important powers, whether they're economic, like China, or geopolitical and military superpowers such as Russia. Obviously, in the multipolar world, the countries are not always going to, agree on everything. They have the differing views. They have differing opinions. For instance, China and India have had a very, very long border dispute, over 60 years old border dispute along virtually the entirety of their border. So that means that they're not really allies. We cannot call them allies. They're very, very close partners, but not really allies. They're economic partners, but they're certainly not military allies. We could even say that they're military adversaries because, Indian nukes and Chinese nukes are partially aimed at each other. And there's also Pakistan, which is a regional opponent of India, which is supported by China. So in essence, we see that there's a very big difference between how they view their local politics. However, in terms of foreign policy and in terms of how they see the world, they are very much in concert because you see, India is now experiencing a lot of pressure because what they're doing is buying Russian oil because the West doesn't want to buy it, and they're now reselling it to the West. So obviously, the West needs this oil. If it doesn't buy it from Russia, then of course the prices of oil are going to jump. So they have to buy it somehow. And of course, India is the loophole that allows Western countries to buy Russian oil without really saying it's Russian. So in essence, we see this very, very, what we can say ridiculous situation where India is going to be sanctioned because it's selling Russian oil to the West. And the thing is, the West could just, stop buying it. But the thing is, the West needs it. So it's a completely unnecessary conflict. But we see that it's happening, and we see that Trump has actually sped up the process of the integration among the multipolar countries. Now, of course, this is a positive development. I'm not sure if this is what Trump wanted to do, but Trump has the unique opportunity to give America a chance to join the multipolar world as it is, and probably be the first among equals. This concept is not really, it has existed historically, so America would have a chance to still be the most powerful country on the planet, but it wouldn't be the only dominant power. And if America joined the multipolar world, then we wouldn't have a conflict. The only other side that wouldn't be part of this multipolar world would be the European Union or NATO. And of course, they could be pressured into stopping their aggressive stance towards other multipolar countries. The issue is, once again, the war party in the United States, and to what extent would Trump be allowed, or to what extent would it be even possible for Trump to push back against the war party and prevent total escalation? And of course, this is going to depend on a lot of factors. I don't think we're going to see anything like a civil war in America, but we might see a period of increased political instability because the war party is going to try to foment dissent in the country. Obviously, there are going to be repercussions because of that, but still, I think it's important that the U.S. maintains some sort of a stability and that it engages in some sort of let's say communication or contacts with the multipolar world to prevent global destabilization, because obviously this is something that all of us would suffer from. On another note, the multipolar world is going to be also a good opportunity for other countries that have been exploited by the neo-colonial system. They're going to get the chance to become sovereign nations. And this is where we have to, the West is going to have to accept the fact that the neo-colonial system is no longer viable. It's not going to be accepted by sovereign countries, and that the best way forward for all of us would be to make some sort of a global agreement where countries and their sovereignty is going to be respected, where they're not going to be exploited and presented as neo-colonies and not given any other alternative. Otherwise, the alternative to all of that would be war. And of course, this war would be on the scale that the humanity has never seen before. Even if it remains conventional, it's going to be all-encompassing because we live in the modern world. Everything is connected. Technologies are on the level we've never had before. So warfare would be conducted on all levels. So that doesn't just mean kinetic. It means cyber. It means possibly biological, chemical. This sort of warfare is already ongoing, where various interest groups and corporations are conducting warfare, even though they wouldn't call it warfare, but they are conducting what essentially could be called the warfare on the entirety of humanity. And it is our duty as human beings to push back against this as much as possible, because what's the alternative? The alternative, of course, is for all of us to suffer the consequences of an open confrontation that is going to ruin our lives to the extent we can't imagine until it happens. And just to prevent that, of course, we're going to have to push back in other ways. I think one of the best ways, of course, is to stay informed, and that means not to trust the mainstream propaganda machine that keeps spewing the nonsense that we see and hear every single day that makes no sense, that doesn't explain the situation. It just makes you more confused. I think it's pretty clear that the more you watch the news, the less you know. The world is complex. Obviously, the world is far more complex than than one TV program could explain. So I think the best, of course, to do is to look for the information from other countries, especially the countries that you're interested in, and to try to understand how those countries function and what interest does your government have to attack them or to destabilize them in other ways. Because you see, the political spectrum in Western countries is being manipulated in ways most people can't even imagine. And we see that these right-wing people think that immigrants are their problem, and they're coming to those countries to steal their jobs, without realizing that the powers that control their countries are the ones doing that. So they're the ones who go to other countries, destroy them, whether it doesn't matter if it's direct warfare, economic warfare, sanctions, other forms of pressure that is not considered warfare, but essentially it is. And when those people have nowhere to go, they go to Western countries and they do menial jobs and other stuff that most of the domestic population doesn't want to do. And then people get upset because, obviously when other people come to your community, they're going to change it in ways that you might not like. So the best way to go forward is to prevent your government from destroying other countries so that, these people can come. So again, true sovereignty for everyone is the only way forward. And I think it's something that all of us should fight for. I think I can stop there. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, I'm here.
Okay, well, thank you, Drago. You can hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a thought. I don't know if people have any questions, or I have a thought question. And at the same time, I mean, there's been a lot of action in the news, with the whole Charlie Kirk assassination. And
Yeah.
I don't think it hurts to at least address that. And because I'm not sold, I see a lot of the media that right now, alternative media is technically mainstream media, I think, in a sense. Even if
Yeah.
Twitter or whatever, they're really pushing this whole Israel's killing our people and da 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 da. I don't hear the word deep state very much anymore. Now it's just radical left and Israel. I don't hear Five Eyes. Who's really going to benefit from this, and what's the end game? Is it to radicalize the right and versus the left at a new level of violence and strife? Will that work? The bad guys don't control the media the way they used to. They've kind of lost. They're still able to amplify things, but it's so decentralized now. So yeah, it seems like a big, where is this going to go? Is it? Yeah, there's any thoughts? We could go for a while.
Well, I mean, what you said about radicalizing people, I think that's a very, very good point. I think everything suggests that people in power, whoever they are, we can call them whatever there are a bunch of names for them. They really want to radicalize people because obviously we don't need any wars. We don't need confrontations between countries or within countries, but they happen all the time. So that means someone very powerful is pushing for this. They need people divided. I mean, it's the oldest trick in the book, divide et impera, which in Latin means divide and rule, or divide and conquer. So in this case, they realize that many people have actually awakened. And I don't like the term because, of course, the so-called woke movement has taken that term. But many people have really awakened to the fact that they're being manipulated and lied to for pretty much everything, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's domestic policy. And of course, one of the best ways to, move themselves out of the spotlights for those people in power is to, give us, well, throw the bone and, let the dogs just fight it out. And of course, for them, we are the dogs. We are the regular people who are not supposed to know or understand these things in big politics. And we're the ones who are going to suffer the consequences of any sort of destabilization. The people in power, they might lose some power, or something else might happen to their wealth. But for the most part, they're not gonna feel anything. They're not gonna feel the brunt of any of this. It's going to be the regular people. You see, I mean, there are so many things that make no sense. For instance, when they said that there's this new sort of bird flu, and when they had to kill a bunch of chicken in the United States, that has led to shortages of basic food like eggs, and it's pretty clear that this was done intentionally, and it was done by the Biden administration in the last several months of his tenure. So what they wanted to do is either to destabilize the current administration, or this has, or just to, pretty much contribute to the general instability that might, I mean, again, I don't think that the civil war is something that should be ignored, the danger of civil war. Last year, I think it was last year, there was this movie that was literally presenting the civil war. And we shouldn't ignore these signs. It is Hollywood, of course, but we shouldn't ignore this, because you see, in Ukraine, before Zelensky became president, there was this very interesting TV show where Zelensky was actually playing the president, and this was going on in, like, early in the mid 2010s, and I think it was 2014, 2015. I forgot the actual date, but he was presented as the president. Like it was like a sitcom combination, like a political sitcom, something like that. He was supposedly fighting against corruption and stuff like that. And it's impossible for me to imagine that, whoever wanted him in power didn't have a plan. And it was a very popular TV show, so they wanted him in power. They wanted him to be president. And just, several years later, he ran for president. He won the election. I think it was in 2019. So we see that these people, they project things on us, and the media, of course, is one of the best ways to do it. So if they're contemplating civil war, they will want to present the civil war to the general population as something that is going to be ingrained in your mind. And it's interesting because you see the word TV program. What does that mean? Well, it means that there's a TV program that is literally programming you. It's pretty much creating this sort of way of thinking. So if they want to make sure that people think civil war or war in general is normal, they would want such TV programs or any sort of media content to be available online and for most people to see.
Absolutely. Predictive programming. We are in an age of
Yep.
predictive programming. Questions from our audience. I believe I see everyone here. Thoughts? Jenny.
Okay. I'm wondering if you could maybe speculate as to the motivations of, like you said, whatever we call them, whoever these people
Yep.
are, whether it's civil war in the States or kinetic war in Europe or nuclear war. Why would they want this? It doesn't seem like any of these things are going to bring benefits to anybody. And yet somehow it really feels like this is what they desire. They're pushing us. Why? Can you have any idea? What is their motivation?
Thank you for the question, Jenny. It's a $1 million question, or $1 billion question if you want, because really all of us are going to ask ourselves, what's the point of this, right? I mean, if I were in power, I would just want everyone to be happy, and it would be really great if we could just all live in peace. Well, I mean, that's what most normal people would want. The issue is the people in power. They see it differently. They see it from a position of power. So to maintain power, you need tools, and of course, those tools have to encroach on the privacy of most people, which is what we have through technology and through these intelligence community services. And for them, and this is something that they keep talking about. They keep talking about depopulation, that the so-called fact that the planet is overpopulated and we need to, stop living. It's very interesting when you have people like Bill Gates, who has a bunch of kids, come to all of us and say, well, there's too many of us, and we should reduce the population. So, I mean, my message to people like him is, well, I mean, if you want to reduce the population, you're free to go and jump off a bridge, but start from yourself, because what does reducing the population mean? Well, it means to killing a bunch of people, and then that same guy comes to you, when there's a virus. And he tells you, you see, I really want depopulation, but again, I'm also a philanthropist. So here's this, a vial of this life-saving drug or vaccine or whatever you want to call it, and put it in your body, you're going to survive. So again, I think anyone with two functioning brain cells would ask themselves, does this make sense? Well, obviously it doesn't. So again, these people, I think they realize that there's too many of us for them to be able to control us. So this is why they keep talking about the golden billion, or sort of concepts like that. I think it's important that we realize that if you have 7 billion people, or actually over 8 billion people at this point, and all of us have, phones, all of us have lives, and we have communication and stuff like that with other people. Can you imagine just the amount of data that they have to go through every day to be able to control most of the population? Just let's say the United States itself, like 350 million people communicate every day. That's like tens of billions of messages every day. So essentially, in order to control that, you need to have the ability to process the data. And of course, the best way to do it would be to have a smaller population that you have to take care of. And of course, there are also the questions of automation and AI and all these other new technologies that are going to shape the future that we're going to see in the next several decades.
Monty, just unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just a few thoughts that I've been considering so far as the most recent developments and the ongoing situation we're finding ourselves in. It appears clear that the deep state, if you'll call it, or those that wish for control of one world hegemony, it appears that they're losing in Ukraine. Obviously, that card's been played, it's not working. And in my mind, what I'm noticing now is the chaos card is now being just utter chaos. In other words, turn over the chessboard, just create chaos, which could very well lead to civil war. And one of the indicators I'm finding of that is this whole thing of decapitation strikes and political assassinations of civilians, of scientists in the case of Iran, Soleimani, if you will, when Trump did that situation. You could even look at General Ben Hodges, calling on an attack on Moscow Victory Day parade, saying that's a legitimate target. Where you've got deep state actors like General Chris Donahue calling for the invasion of Kaliningrad. In other words, you're finding these players that are making political assassinations a thing. You take Luigi, the guy that killed that healthcare professional, the CEO of United Healthcare, and people were cheering that. Now you've got people cheering the fact that Charlie Kirk was killed. And there's a fight for his legacy now. In other words, you had Charlie Kirk 1.0, who was pro-Israel and pro-Zionist. But the fact is also he came out recently questioning why the Epstein files have not been released. He came out recently with statements that Zelensky was a CIA puppet. He came out challenging Trump on bombing Iran, right, being behind that. Then you have the recent Qatar thing where Israel attacked Qatar, and Trump said, well, he had no knowledge of that. But that's obviously impossible. In other words, the CIA and DOD had eyes on, from the get-go, all flights over these territories, U.S.-controlled airspace. And somewhere, whether Trump knew or not, somewhere within the Department of Defense and the CIA knew this was occurring. So all I'm saying is it appears that political assassinations have become a thing, and I wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, you mentioned Venezuela. There's no way we're going to invade Venezuela, but it could very well be. They're setting the modus operandi for political assassination regime change there. So I'm just saying this has become a thing in our culture, and it would take nothing but a spark to create utter chaos and civil war in the United States, given that this has become a thing. So would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much, Monty. That was an incredible expose of essentially what's going on. We see that there is definitely this normalization of political assassinations. And I mean, this is not something that has happened, that's been happening just in the last few years. It has been ongoing, since the dawn of mankind, but now it has escalated to a level that we haven't really seen probably ever. I think these assassinations have actually started at least last year when the mysterious helicopter crash of Ebrahim Raisi happened, who was the president of Iran at the time. And he was very important because what he did is he integrated Iran into the multipolar world. And it was obvious that somebody really was interested in murdering him. And I've had the chance to talk to people who are in the military in Azerbaijan and Russia and Iran. And it was an interesting situation because just several days before Raisi moved to northwestern Iran to meet the president of Azerbaijan, Mr. Aliyev, there was this American C-17 Globemaster, if I'm not mistaken. And we know that this was a separate special modification of the airplane that was specialized in electronic warfare. And Raisi was flying in a U.S.-made helicopter that was from the 1970s, and his altimeter malfunctioned, and he died. Now, of course, the altimeter malfunctioning, that's not really a common occurrence when you fly a helicopter. So this was a very strange occurrence because there were also other 3 helicopters which were just as old, but they didn't have these issues. Only one helicopter which carried Raisi, who was the president, and Abdullahian, who was the foreign minister, only that one crashed. And there were people who really speculated that this was a hit. And then afterwards, we have a series of Israeli airstrikes that pretty much wiped out much of the Iranian military and scientific leadership, as you pointed out. These airstrikes were not limited only to, and assassinations were not limited only to Iran, but also happened in Syria, they happened in Lebanon and various other countries. And we now see that, the Israeli government is becoming, pretty desperate to ensure that most of the Middle East is pushed into chaos. And this sort of limited warfare is something, it's the only way for Israel to project power, because otherwise, it's a small country, doesn't have the strategic depth to fight wars such as, in the way that the Russians are fighting it, or the United States fighting such wars when it needs to, or when it thinks it needs to. So in essence, the only way for Israel to function in the Middle East is to hit the leadership of various countries, whether it's Iran, whether it's the local Shia militias, or let's say movements such as the Houthis. And of course, we see that Israel doesn't have qualms about doing that. Of course, the issue is, if you keep doing that, well, somebody's going to respond, because, it's impossible to have diplomacy if you keep killing the leaders of other countries. And at some point, it's going to unite the Arab world, which, of course, at this point seems pretty much impossible, because Arab countries are divided. They still are divided, but they're coming together. Now, another issue, of course, is when you try to do it to a nuclear superpower such as Russia. As I mentioned, there were several assassination attempts on Putin. I know of two that have happened 100%. I've written about it for InfoBRICS. There's undeniable evidence that they tried to do it. The last time it happened, it was in Kursk area when they tried to target Putin's helicopter, and the previous one happened in August. Actually, I think no, it was July 29, 2024, and they tried to kill Putin during the Naval Day parade in Russia in 2024, and in St. Petersburg. So what really happened afterwards is Mr. Belousov, who is the defense minister of Russia, he called the then defense secretary of the United States, Austin, and he told him in no uncertain terms, if anything like this happens again, you're going to have nuclear war without warning. So you see, and the thing is, it happened again in this year when they tried to kill Putin when he was visiting the Kursk area where the Russians pushed back the Ukrainian counteroffensive. So essentially, we see that the people who are in power are really playing with fire. And you see, when leaders of and top-ranking politicians of one country tell another country that they're going to have nuclear war, and both of those countries have, well, around 11,000 nuclear weapons, that is something that, of course, is, if that doesn't, if that doesn't raise fear in people, then I don't know what will, because we're all going to suffer the consequences of this. And then you see all these billionaires building bunkers. Why the hell would you need a bunker? Because you see, you're going to live in a bunker for 2 years, and afterwards, what happens? Like you run out of food, and then what do you do? Like you go outside and you see a nuclear wasteland. Is that going to be a way for you to save yourself? Well, not, obviously not. The best way for us to save ourselves is to prevent the lunatics, from being in power in these very powerful countries. So, of course, if they want war, if you have people like Lindsey Graham, if they want war, well, I would give them a rifle and, boots and other gear and, go to war. If you really want it, go fight it out with other people, but don't push the rest of us into something that we don't want. Don't push us into a global confrontation that none of us are going to survive, or worse yet, the people who died instantly are going to be the lucky ones, because the rest of us, or the rest of the population that survives, are going to be fighting for scraps in a nuclear wasteland. So again, I think it's important that people realize that there is danger. I'm not trying to scaremonger, or anything, but I think it's important to realize that people need to put pressure on governments to stop escalation. And one of the good things, as I said, like the Trump administration has a million flaws. We saw that they walked back on many of the election promises they had, but still, one of the good things is they're talking with the Russians. They're also ready to talk with the Chinese, although this is the U.S. military is a bit more aggressive towards China, because China still doesn't have as an arsenal as big as Russia's. The Russians have like a 10 times bigger nuclear arsenal than China. So the whole thing is, it's good that they're talking. It's much better than what we had before during the Biden administration, when there were several moments where really nuclear war could have happened. And now, as far as Trump walking back on his promises, I think the issue is, I'm not sure if he's involved in any of the Epstein stuff that has been happening. There are theories, very serious actually theories on that. I don't know enough about it to claim anything, but I think there's definitely something regarding Trump, and that's the fact that he has to contend with the people from the federal government, from the federal apparatus. Because you see, when Trump came to power, he didn't really replace everyone. That's impossible. You have people who have been in the government for 20 or 30 years or longer, and you can't just replace them, because the government would just collapse. So in essence, Trump has to somehow find the balance between the things that he wanted to do, at least during the election, and the things that he can't really do. And he has to also take into account the interest of the United States. We can disagree with many of the policies of the United States, of course, but the thing is, Trump himself, well, he doesn't want to hurt the geopolitical standing of the United States. And that means that, even when he dismantles organizations such as the USAID, I don't think he really dismantled it. What he really did is he put a lot of their, power projection capabilities, he put them back into the hands of the intelligence community, because he realizes that, doing this openly is going to hurt the image of the United States, because, the USAID and similar organizations are dominated by these so-called leftists. I mean, I don't like the term because the political spectrum in the United States now, or in the world, is a bit illogical, because what's right and what's left, I don't think it really matters to the regular person, because I mean, even the division to communism and capitalism doesn't really make sense, because what you have in communism is people who run the command economy, and most of them are ideologues or politicians. And what do you have in so-called capitalism? Well, it's not the free market, because you have billionaires who are manipulating the market, which means it's still the command economy, but it's based on greed. While in the communism, it's based on supposedly the fair distribution of wealth, but in essence, it doesn't really work that way. It's also inefficient in the long term. So in essence, we see the system of control that hasn't changed on any side, essentially, but they just have different methods of controlling the populations, and then they sell us this ideological spectrum story that people keep repeating and regurgitating, and just believing that it's true, but in essence, it's very questionable whether it's true or not.
Yeah, I would just follow up with one observation. Charlie Kirk was a major force on the college campuses and Gen Z. And more of them were becoming anti-Zionist, and I think he was picking up on that message. In other words, Charlie Kirk 2.0 was something that I think the legacy ought to be kept alive. But on the other hand, you have the forces trying to make it woke against unwoke. In other words, they're trying to go with Charlie Kirk 1.0 and make this woke as against anti-woke, like his assassin was living with a transgender, and that was a thing, so now it's against transgenders and so forth. So I just think it's important. And, you even have figures like Benny Johnson and Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin saying they're going to they're going to pick up the sword of Charlie Kirk. In other words, they're trying to turn the complete thing around as far as his legacy. He was a very young man. He was 31 years old and really coming into his own. But I think it's very significant, his being outspoken against the genocide, against Ukraine, and against the bombing of Iraq, and his call to make friends with Russia. And I think they're going to try to bury that and make it a woke, anti-woke thing, which will just further inflame the potential for civil war.
Absolutely. And I think, I agree that the people who are really rejoicing at his death, there's no word to describe it, what sort of a person would really be happy about it. I disagreed with his pro-Zionist views when he was Charlie Kirk 1.0, as you said, but I would never wish him any harm, or even the most woke person out there. I wouldn't want their death, nor would I rejoice if somebody killed them. I think it was important. What he was doing was more important in the sense that he was talking to people that disagreed with him. He promoted the culture of dialogue, and this is what true intellectuals do. They promote the culture of dialogue, and you can simply have a discourse with someone and debate someone instead of trying to shoot each other because you dislike what the other person says. And this is the essence of civilization. If we don't respect that, then we are just cave people, essentially. And whoever murdered him really wants to make sure that this sort of debate doesn't happen, and that people don't come together, to discuss issues, as it was the case in all civilized societies in recorded history. but they want people to be divided and, to hate each other, as you mentioned, simply supercharging the views of both sides and pushing them against each other. That's the best way to keep a constant conflict.
Absolutely. I mean, the debate culture scares them for sure, which is that's a good sign, right? That, as people have remarked, there is a desperation in the attempts of the bad guys, and yeah, going back to their old school, just killing people left and right. Now with their whole MK Ultra legions of mind controlled weird people that there's always some weird background story. But yeah, the debate culture. I mean, if that's one legacy that if that keeps that kind of culture alive, whether it's about economic development, I think that's where a lot of the debates need to go. Let's have some robust economic debates of how to have an industrial renaissance in the Western world. There's talk about the nuclear renaissance. I think that's a good example, though, of the bad guys having shot themselves in the foot and having realized that, oh my God, we made a big mistake, because just a few seconds ago it was all green, anti-nuclear, anti-industrialization, and then overnight they're like, hey, we need to we go hard on nuclear, and there's all these new or very cool companies from SMR, Hexium, Oklo, like they're all now coming online. And I guess it's a question, it's a race against time, though. Do they have enough runway to power and revitalize a physical economy or not? Right. I think that's really also a question of what will decide the stability. I heard a story. I don't know if you heard about this one, where there was like a South Korea where they had workers. They had a plant. I believe it was batteries or lithium in the U.S. And they were using South Korean workers to set it up, though, because the Americans don't really have the workforce to run it. And then they were trying to kick out the South Korean workers because they didn't have the proper visas. But it's like the US doesn't have the labor force. And I believe same thing happened with textiles, where they're not, similar thing happened where they're trying to get the textile industries back. And that's also caught the not landing. And then you got the robotics, right? While in China, robotics are assembling cars or building entire dams, right? China built a whole dam with just robotics and AI. And in the US, the robotics debate is around, are we going to have robots to serve you Big Macs or Whoppers? We're just going to replace the fast food workers. So yeah, very different.
Yeah, I think this is the issue. You see, in Western countries, people debate on ethics. In China, they don't have that problem. What they will do is they will just implement certain things that are good for the economy. The problem is, of course, that there was a big societal change in Western countries where people think that we live in the so-called post-industrial age. Now, I just want to say it's a total nonsense. You can't have post-industrial age without industry. You need actual industry to produce the things that you need. And if you eliminate industry, you're not going forward, you're going back to the pre-manufacturing era. And that was the era of lacking, of not having enough resources to live the life that you would want. And the problem is it's ridiculous, the notion that there's a lack of labor force in the United States, a country of 350 million people. It's ridiculous to me. The problem is that they've set up the education system in a way that doesn't really meet the demands of the economy. So if everybody has degrees in things that the economy doesn't need, you're going to have a bunch of unemployed people or people who don't contribute to the economy. And if nobody wants to do certain types of jobs, then you're going to have to, move a lot of other people from other countries into the United States for them to do these jobs. So, for instance, in construction, all sorts of menial jobs and so on, somebody needs to do that. And if you don't do it, your economy is not going to function. We can't all have college degrees and be in offices all day and have $100,000 salaries and so on, and believe that the economy is going to go forward. It's not. You need to have some sort of a balance. The issue is in Western countries, besides the military industrial complex, the production economy is virtually entirely outsourced. And this is why Trump is failing in attempts to reindustrialize the United States. He needs some way of he needs workers, but again, the United States has the problem of competing with countries that have much a bigger workforce in terms of like production economy, and they're also cheaper in terms of labor. So you can't really compete, with the Chinese when it comes to production. The Chinese have like 10 times lower salaries than an average American worker, and that means that the production of let's say an iPhone in the United States is going to make the iPhone cost $10,000, but if it's made in China, it's going to cost $1,000. That discrepancy makes it impossible for the United States to reindustrialize itself without actually lowering the standard of most people who would then be forced to go and work in the production industry. So this is the issue. This is like the catch-22 that the United States is in now, and not just the United States. I think all Western countries have this issue.
Yeah, I was actually at a supper. I was talking with a guy who's pretty savvy, and he was making the point that really, I mean, this is a bit stark, but the only way for the US to really catch up is to actually go towards hyperinflation, in the sense that if you can really decrease the value, right, of labor and currency, where the US actually becomes competitive in terms of production with other countries. Now, obviously, I'm hearing that's a pretty, but people got to wake up. And this is probably why debates on these things could actually work, I think, and could become popular, where even among the bad guys, right, some of them, I think, need to be reasoned with, right, and that they can understand, right, as evil or crazy as they may be, on a practical level, you can put everything else aside and realize, there are certain very decisive moves. And so a culture of debate around these things would be pretty provocative and interesting for sure.
Absolutely.
Anyone else? Thoughts, questions, protests, prayers? No songs. Did we have any, or if I should... Yeah, things in the comments, things we've already addressed.
Yeah.
I mean, the situation is very fluid, and people are surprisingly, I think people realize we're at a pivotal point, and it's not clear what's going to happen, right? I feel like that's part of the strategic analysis. I don't know, is that anybody who thinks they know exactly what's going to happen is probably in a less strategic position than those who are kind of...
Well, I mean, I don't think there's anyone who really knows what's going to happen 100% unless they're in power and deciding. And of course, in that case, they wouldn't be in a podcast of any kind talking about it. But I think it's important, again, that the people understand that what really is going on. So again, for instance, I mentioned we talked about the Ukraine war. You see, every single day when you watch news or watch TV or watch YouTube, whatever, you get this idea that the Russians are losing and they can't win, and they have over 1 million casualties and so on. And I mentioned, when you look at the real numbers, you see that's not the case. And then people say, Russia has 150 million people, NATO has 1 billion people, we can win. Well, even without that, like, who's going to fight the war? Like, I would ask people in the West, are you ready to take, a gun and go to Ukraine and fight the Russians? Because the thing is, as a regular person, you're not contributing to anything. The vast majority of soldiers are killed by artillery or drones or long-range missiles. Like, only 5% of soldiers get to see the guy on the other side. They don't even get to see the soldier on the other side because they're killed, way before they get the chance to reach the other side of the front line. So in essence, you're training, even if you're the best soldier in the world, you're going to get hit by an artillery shell and killed. And, that shell, it costs like 100, let's say $200. So the essence is the best thing is not to fight a war, right? But for some reason, we can debate what the reason is. Whoever is in charge they keep sending the Ukrainian men, entire generations of Ukrainian men into certain death. And you can prove this mathematically. I put several sources in on some of my articles on the BRICS portal. The American Society of Surgeons really, they researched the structure of victims and injuries in the Ukrainian conflict, and they came to the conclusion that 80% of people are either killed or maimed by artillery on both sides. And the thing is, the drones, they function as force multipliers in the war. Every single drone that can see another person can also help artillery, correct their fire. So that means almost every shell that you fire is going to kill someone. And of course, the thing is, the Russians produce about 3 times more artillery shells than the entirety of NATO. They've always, if you look at the history of the Russian military and their military doctrine, you see that the artillery was always at the top of their list. Of course, apart from nuclear missiles, but that's another story. So the thing is, in conventional warfare, the Russians mostly focus on artillery because it's the most direct form of fire support without having to worry about jets and stuff like that. So that means that if you're going to go to war with Russia, you have to realize that you're going to be sending waves and waves of men who are going to be literal cannon fodder, who are going to die for no freaking reason, right? So again, this has like a cumulative effect where people who would have to fight such a war would be completely demoralized, because who in God's name wants to be a number on or part of death statistics in a war? Like, you would want to live your life and not be part of those statistics. And this is why it's so important that people realize the truth, that the wars that will be fought in the future are not really the wars you see in video games. Like, it's not Call of Duty, it's not whatever the hell people play. It really is something that where you just die and you don't even know it happened, because you for the most part you're not going to even hear the shell. So in essence, I think it's important. I always point this out. It's important that people realize that whoever wants to go to war is just going to throw their life away for no reason.
Absolutely. That was a good expose. The drones, everybody's freaking out about the drones, but yeah, it makes sense. They're just.
Well, I keep saying to people, like, if every shell had a camera on it, nobody would be talking about drones. So that's the thing. This is like the sort of like observation bias, where you see the drones, you see the drone footage, but you don't see the footage from other stuff that kills. And but still, I mean, even if it's just the drones, again, it's very demoralizing, because whatever you know about warfare, if you've been to the military, if you're a veteran, if you fought in some other wars, all of your knowledge is good for nothing, because a 16-year-old guy who likes to play video games might kill you from 100 kilometers away, and just with a joystick, and that's it. Like, if that's not demoralizing and demotivating to go to war, I don't know what would be.
That's a good point. Yeah, we need a new demoralization campaign. Demoralize people from going to war.
Yeah, exactly. And like, focus on the domestic issues and try to resolve that, because whoever wants to send you to die in some far off land, when you go back, they will not give a damn about your issues. And your life is going to be worse off, even if you come back whole physically. You need time to reintegrate into the society. And if something happens to you, like you're maimed, it's even worse, because you might end up just begging in the streets, and of course that's not good for anyone. So again, whoever wants to really understand how the world works, they should focus primarily in their own countries to realize why their countries are doing what they're doing, and why would they want even to go to war, with a country that's on the other side of the planet for no reason.
Absolutely. I see. I think maybe this will be our last question here. I see Kelly unmute yourself and take it away.
Yeah.
Take it away, Kelly.
Do you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you, Dave, you're mentioning, what we really want is like an industrial renaissance where we can flourish and, prosper and things like that. My concern is we just might get that, but it'll be more of like a war kind of industrial renaissance where we're going to be building missiles and all these things for war. Like Russia already even has that. That's like their economy. They're constantly building all kinds of things to defend their country, right? And then in return, here in the West, like we're doing the same, and it's just like the arms buildup. We're just building it up, and then people, at least here in where I am, if you're unemployed and they build a little missile factory, most people are going to apply whether they're for or against war, and I'm kind of a little worried about that might be the direction where we're going.
Well, that's definitely a very good point, and this is the issue. This is the only way for Trump to make sure that the U.S. has fast, sort of like, rapid reindustrialization. Because again, as I mentioned, the military-industrial complex is the only part of the production economy that still remains to a large degree in Western countries. This is part of the problem because, what you make, this is what you're going to use. I'm probably going to screw it up, but the quote is, I forgot who said it, but the quote is, if the only tool in your hand is a hammer, everything is going to look like a nail, and you're going to go and smash things around. So this is the issue. If all you're going to be building are missiles and shells and fighter jets and tanks, then this is the thing you're going to be using. And of course, the only place you can use it in is war. So this is the issue. If there's going to be a reindustrialization in Western countries, it cannot be done in this way. Otherwise, it's going to be completely self-defeating in the long run. It might, there are certain industries that might be connected to the military-industrial complex, which are civilian in essence, but they are like part of the entire logistics system that might be reinvigorated in this process. But again, the basis of it is going to be the war industry, which again, as we mentioned, is a problem. So the only reason the Russians have really switched to a war economy is because they have constant threats from Western countries. Now, the idea that the Russians are going to invade the West, to me, is a bit ridiculous, because why on earth would they do that? First of all, people should remember that the Soviet Union was around 35% larger than Russia. If Russia wanted really more land, they would have never dismantled the Soviet Union. The whole idea during the 1990s was that Russia was feeding these other republics. And it really was the case to a large degree that Russia was actually, that this affected the Russian economy, and that they were giving money to these far poorer republics, especially in Central Asia. And when they got rid of those republics, they just, their economy was much better, and they actually had a pretty good the development, economic growth. So, if you already dismantled the largest country, one of the largest countries in the history of mankind, why on earth would you want more land? If the Russians didn't attack in 1989, when they had 50,000 nukes and 5 million soldiers and 50,000 tanks and so on, why on earth would they attack now when that army doesn't exist anymore, or it's like 10 times smaller than it was? It doesn't make sense. So the only logical conclusion in Russia is that the NATO is going to try to attack them. And of course, they want to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's why they're rebuilding their military. And when the process is done, their military is going to be the most well-equipped, one of the largest, if not the largest, and the one with the most battlefield experience in the world. And whoever wants to fight that, again, as I said, good luck, because even if you succeed, which is unlikely, but let's say even if NATO succeeds, what's left for the Russians is to press the red button. And again, nobody wins.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a good reality check for anyone who hasn't made that discovery yet. And yeah, I don't think this is a bad place to end it. This was a good grounding session just to ground everyone and, check in. So now we're up to date and we can take on the coming weeks and months with a strategic mindset.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone, to Matt, to you, and to the entire group. You've all been absolutely fantastic. And of course, I really look forward to doing this in the future.
Thank you, Drago. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see everyone next week. Ciao, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.